Hello and welcome to another Topical Ramble special. This time I'm doing a video response to Dean at Escape to Gaming. He put a video up entitled 5 Community Questions. So I thought, like the topics, like the idea, and thought I'd do a response. I should have done it last week, but I got sidetracked with another couple of videos I was already had planned. So anyway, thought I'd get it done now. Before we get going, I'm playing the fantastic Quake 2 on the Xbox 360. This came with Quake 4. If you remember when I was talking about in my last video, I couldn't really remember whether I got Quake 4 on launch day or shortly after. Anyway, Quake 2 actually came on disc, on a separate disc inside the Quake 4 box. Which was rather nice and unexpected as well when I got it, because Quake 4 had never been released. Sorry, Quake 2 had never been released on the Xbox 360 or previously. I don't think it was originally even released on the Xbox. I know there was versions of it on the original PlayStation, because I've got that, and I can't remember if it was Quake 2 or Quake, or whether both appeared on the N64 now. I can't remember. But in any event, it was a pleasant surprise when I got the game on the 360. I had Quake 4 on PC, and that came with Quake 2, and it also came with all the DLC now. Add-ons. They weren't DLC back then, they were mission discs. Now, you don't get that with this version, but you get Quake 2, which is, the main part of the thing, and any event, it's a fantastic game. Also got one of the best intros to a video game ever for me. Sort of typical 90s sort of cinematics, but bloody hell, it looked good for the day, and the music was fantastic. It really set the atmosphere for the game. But anyway, I'm digressing. Want to get on with these questions. Okay, so the first question was, what percentage of retro versus modern games do you play annually? That's really going to depend on what you define as retro. I mostly play modern games these days. I used to play quite a lot of retro. I've still got a number of retro games in my collection, nowhere near what I had. But I mostly play modern games. Simply because I always like to experience new things. I like having retro games to go back to. I have quite a lot of PlayStation Mega Drive games. I've got a couple of N64 games. But for the most part, I'm all about playing new games. I do enjoy going back and playing, but the vast majority, I'd say 90%, of what I play annually is modern games, and about 10% will be retro games. When they're there, when the mood takes, they're there for me to be able to pick up and play, and I enjoy that. I think it's great. Second question: what is your favourite genre of games, past and present? Now, this is a really tough one to answer, because I like quite a broad spectrum of games. I love racing games. I love first-person shooters, I love action-adventure, I love RPGs. In fact, the only real two genres I don't tend to bother much with are puzzle games and beat-em-ups. Now, I'll play the odd puzzle game, for a few minutes on a mobile while I'm waiting for something. If I'm in a doctor's waiting room or whatever, I'll mess about for a little while on a puzzle game there. But, what I consider the length of time that I spend gaming, the vast majority of it is action adventure, first person shooters, racing games. I like some sport games. I like Pro Evo Soccer, FIFA. I like those games. So yeah, it's a real difficult one. I tend to go across the broad spectrum of them, to be honest with you. I think action RPG may just shade it. I love nothing more than starting a game and your character's, really basic and weak, and then you sort of slowly level your character up as you go along and start to become stronger. I like that. But a good first-person shooter comes along, and I can get lost in those for hours as well. So it's a really difficult one to call on that one. I'm afraid I'm going to have to cop out and say it's probably going to be a tie between action RPG and first-person shooters on that one. But then, God, I love the Tomb Raider games and I love the Uncharted games. So, oh God, here's a real big cop out. I just love a good games. Full stop. There you go. What are your biggest concerns or fears for the future of gaming? Well, this is going to probably form the biggest part of this video. It's an interesting thing what's happening to games at the moment. First of all, to answer that question and then to sort of qualify that answer to some extent, my biggest fear is that games are going to become disposable. My big fear really is that game services are going to end up like Netflix, where you pay a subscription to a service and then you get to play X, Y, or Z games for so long per month. And then what's available rotates around, or you can only play so many games in a month or something like that, depending on the level of subscription that you have. Whether that's dealt with via timed downloads, or whether it's done via streaming, either way, online connectivity is going to be a requirement. And I think we all can see where that's going. I think we could be looking at the last generation, or maybe the penultimate generation of the more traditional gaming. Certainly digitally distributed games is being rammed down our throats whether we like it or not, and that's another thing that I don't like. I like to own the physical media. I like to play the game when I want, where I want, and how I want. I think if you pay the money that you pay for a video game, you should be entitled to play it indefinitely for as long as you want, whenever you want. I don't think there should be any restrictions placed upon that. Games, especially those that have single player elements to them that require you to be connected online, I think that's a load of crap. I disagree with that principle. Fine, if you want to make an MMO, that's fine. I mean, the very nature of it is going to require internet connection. It's ridiculous to suggest that anyone, you could be annoyed that a game like World of Warcraft, for example, could require an offline mode, because it's the whole nature of that game has been built around having nothing other than online connectivity. It's a community-driven game, so that's fair enough. In the past, consoles really weren't geared towards that, but as we saw towards the end of the last generation, and now more in this generation, it seems to be becoming more of a thing with games that have very limited or next to no single-player elements to them, but they also require constant online connection. I think that's a troubling trend, because essentially it's built-in redundancy into the game. Once those servers are down, as Dean put quite correctly in his video, the disc essentially becomes a coaster. So even though you own the physical media, you might as well just use it as a mini frisbee or a coaster, because it's useless. It's not going to do anything. And that worries me. That's a worrying trend, and I don't like it. Especially for console games more than maybe PC games. And I'll qualify that as follows. PC games tend to be considerably cheaper. When you buy a console game, you're not only paying for the actual game, but you're also paying for the license fee for that game to run on that console. It's why console games are more expensive. Now, value is very much a subjective thing. What is value for money for one person is an absolute rip-off for somebody else. So to go into the whole debate as to whether or not games are too expensive, whether games are cheap for what you get, it's a very, very difficult thing. For someone like me who's a bit of a middle-aged dinosaur when it comes to video games, I sort of was there at the beginning, so to speak. Back in the UK in the 1980s, when I was buying games for my Commodore 64, games were £9.99. Now games are £45.99. So even though obviously the games now are far more complex, bigger and more impressive than ever before, it's still, it's still a more money for the same hobby, if you catch my drift. Even though I know you can't compare them, and I accept that, it is still more money for the same hobby. And that's fine. I think that, if you're going to go into this realm of games becoming disposable, I think you have to look at the price that you're charging for these games. Because one of the things that has always been a sweetener for console gamers, in particular paying more for their games than, say, PC owners do when they buy their games downloaded digitally, is the fact that you have something that has a resaleable value. Whether you trade the game in, whether you sell it on eBay, or whether you sell it on Amazon or whatever, you can get some value back. That's sort of the unwritten agreement as to why we accept paying more for video games, because there is a degree of after-sale value. When you download a game on Steam, you can't I mean, there might be systems in place. It's been that many years since I've played on a PC, I can't say this with any authority, but you don't have any physical media that you can go off and sell to somebody else for them to be able to play it. It's tied to your account and it's downloaded. Now, there may be provisions where you can transfer the license to somebody for a fee. I don't know, but as a piece of physical media, that media is yours to resell if you want, or trade in if you want. You can get some additional value for the game that you've got. So when you pay more for that game, it's not too bad. Okay, it's more money, but you've got scope to try to claw back some of that money should you choose not to carry on playing that game if you don't like it, or whether you finish with it and don't envision you playing it again. There is a way of clawing back some of that expense, which you can then put towards other games. I think it stimulates new game sales, contrary to what some game publishers were trying to spin about, trading games are terrible and all of this. They had this whole spiel that was going on, which was absolute nonsense. If people can get something back for what they've got, the likelihood is they're going to put that money towards buying new games. So it actually stimulates game sales rather than hinders them. But with digital games, that's not going to be so much the case, and that does worry me. It was interesting that Microsoft recently did a survey where they said, would you be happy if you got 10% back if you could trade in your digital games and got 10% back? To which I answered, no, 10% is far too low. If you think about how much you get on a game that you might have for a week, you might go buy the game, play it, it's a really short game, and yeah, it was okay, you enjoyed it, but at the end of the day, nah, whatever. I'm not really, you're not really that taken with it. Certainly you're not going to play it again, and another game comes out and you think, I really want that game, but I can't really afford to keep buying games like this. You can take the game you finish with, you can trade it. Now, if you've only had it for a short period of time, many outlets will actually give you a pretty decent amount back, maybe £20, £25, maybe $30 back on that game. So you're going into the area where that's at almost 50% trading. Well, that's a big difference between 10%, because if you bought the game for £45, 10% means that the best you're ever going to get on the trading is £4.50. Now, obviously, the flip side to that is, if it's not restricted to how old the game is, maybe it would balance itself out. But the vast majority of people tend to trade games they've not had for very long that they don't like. Or the only time they really tend to trade a lot of the games that they kept for a while that they do like is when they go to buy a new console and they clear the decks. So, this idea really, you don't get an awful lot for trading in old games in stores anyway. You tend to get, like over here in the UK, some stores will give you as little as 50p, which is an absolute insult because the packaging alone is worth more than that. But the point is, 10% across the board, I think isn't very generous. And if that is going to be the way forward, to me, it would make obtaining new games more difficult. I would have to become even more picky about what games I buy. and that would mean that I would be less likely to speculate on buying new games. So the digital future, the way that games are distributed, that's something that does worry me. That worries me quite a lot, and that is my main concern. I think, we're getting to that point now where, it's obviously clear this is the direction publishers want to take, because it eliminates the second-hand market, which means they get revenue on every game sold. There's fors and against or things like that, but for me personally, and I can only speak of these fears personally, I do dread that day, because we've already seen that game collections can be destroyed arbitrarily if you if somebody does something, or you get hacked, or for some reason you get your account suspended, or you have a problem with your account, your entire games collection is basically gone, and there's nothing you can do about it. Trying to get any kind of justice for these type of things is very, very tough. We've seen issues, particularly with PlayStation Network, whereby if you feel you've been, some charge has been made to your account that shouldn't, and you dispute it, they will give you the money back, but they will suspend your account, and therefore you can't get access to any of the content that you've purchased. So the systems, if we go over to a fully digital system, however that system is delivered, we're basically going to be much more at the mercy of hackers. You're going to be much more at the mercy of arbitrary decisions and changes to terms of service, which if you don't agree with, you can no longer access the library of games that you have. It puts too much power in the wrong people's hands, in my opinion. With physical media, there's a better balance, and I think that's why I really do fear that change. I really do fear the move away from physical media. There's a lot more to the implications of having things that are just digitally based than not owning the title, not owning the actual physical product for you to be able to use whenever you want. There's far more implications to having everything just all stored on a remote server somewhere, or even data files stored on your console, but you need access to a server somewhere in order to be able to play them. That to me is unacceptable, because the systems are too fragile. The systems are not robust enough. The security isn't robust enough, and that would lead me to be very, very uncomfortable about spending a considerable amount of money on games. If every game is £45 and you buy 20 games, that's £900. That's nearly £1,000 worth of content that could be just taken away from you, and there isn't a thing you can do about it. There isn't anything you can do about it. You can't, if someone broke into your house and stole your video games collection, you can claim off your insurance and get that stuff back. But if somebody hacks your console or your computer or your account and steals them, or does something, or makes charges to it that you dispute, and Xbox Live or PlayStation Network or whatever don't want to play ball about that, you're in a big problem. You've got a big, big problem there. And I think that, that's something that people need to be made aware of, that there are serious implications to signing your life over to these companies, signing your entire games collection over to digital only. It sounds great, sounds convenient, but the reality of it is somewhat different. The reality of it, there's a lot to be worried about in that sense, and I think that people need to be more aware of that. And the next question, I went on a while with that one, but I think that's the most important one. The fears is the most important one. Where do you see your gaming collection in 5 years' time or more? I have no idea. I really don't. I have plans to relocate to the United States, which would mean that probably would have to start again. But I don't have any idea where I see my games collection in 5 years. I would still like there to be physical media, obviously. I would like to rebuild a lot of the older games that have gone. I'd like to make sure I have access to an Xbox 360, for example, and rebuild the library of games that I had for that. There's a lot of games I had on that I would like to revisit. But in reality, I don't know. I don't have a plan for that. I have other things in my life which, I need to tend to first before I can get around to tending to that part of things. And what am I looking forward to the most with game development in the future? Well, a lot depends really on what happens with question 3 about the concerns for games. VR does interest me to some extent, though. I think again, it's I don't know whether or not that's something that's going to take off immediately. I think that might, if it's going to be successful, I think it's going to be a slow burn success. I think we're very much in the prototype learning curve stage. It depends whether or not it does well enough to warrant continuous support, whether the ideas are sound and people are on board and are willing to give it a chance. If you look at how Kinect and Move failed dismally, dismally in my opinion anyway, was simply because people didn't engage with those systems. People didn't engage with that way of playing because they weren't particularly great. VR seems to have more interest in a broader spectrum, but I think that I'm not sure. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. What am I looking forward to? What I would really like is perhaps different to what I'm really looking forward to. Game developers stop being treated like fucking shit. And I'm going to emphasize that point. Because I'm sick and tired of the fact that game developers are expected to produce these fantastic worlds in time periods to suit corporate financial period ends. You cannot put a time limit on art. I've said this all along. And if you want to consider games to art, you've got to show some respect to game developers. And I really would hope that with the lessons learned of how poorly received some big name games have been in the last couple of years because they've clearly been rushed to release before they were ready, the hope that I have is that game publishers learn from this, and the investors, more importantly, that put pressure on the people that run these game companies to produce games to meet all these annual returns and so on and so forth. My hope is that they learn the lesson from this, that delivering a great product is more important in the long run than meeting short-term financial commitments, because once people start to tire of things that are broken all the time, they'll stop buying it, or they'll wait. The worst thing is to stop buy or wait. If they wait, it's as good as not buying it, because the games invariably will come down in price because they're not being sold. And people will take the option to wait for the game to be fixed and patched, maybe wait a month or two before buying the game. And that will be problematic for game publishers. And it could see the demise of even more game publishers and more game developers. So I hope that the sensible shoes are put on. But what I'm looking forward to, I'm looking to see where VR goes, but I'm looking forward with hope that the games industry grows up and starts to respect the game developers and the artistic process of making games more. And that's both goes for software and hardware. Let's stop rushing into things. Let's stop chasing trends that last 5 minutes, because it comes at the expense of delivering the best possible experiences. And if the games industry wants to be taken more seriously than it has been, then it needs to grow up. So that's pretty much all I've got to say on those 5 questions. I wanted to sort of sign out this by almost something that I was sitting and thinking about the other day, and the changes that are happening in the games industry. Sometimes it can be frustrating for us older timer gamers. I often sit and wonder, why the bloody hell do people buy games digitally? What benefits do we have from it? And it's all about generational differences. When I started gaming, physical media was the only way you could get games. Nowadays there are different ways of getting games. You've got the physical side, you've got the digital download side, and they've experimented with the streaming services and so on and so forth. But there are different ways, and I think that for some people, buying a game digitally, even though it may cost them a bit more money, works for them better. I think that some people don't put the same value on games collections, and therefore they view it as more of a disposable thing, so they're not bothered about games needing to be online because they've no intentions of playing them in 2 or 3 years anyway. So I think that, you know, when you look at it, you know, through the eyes of someone like me who's middle-aged, you think to yourself, well, why the frigging hell would you do that? What's in it for you? But the reality of the situation and the reality of it all is that you're dealing with people also of a different generation that have different levels of expectation. And they have different levels of what they want to take from the games industry, what they want from their games, how they look at their games. They look at them in a disposable way. They look at it as no more than how some people would look at, you know, going out and having a nice steak dinner or whatever. So, you know, just was a little end piece to this video. It was just something I was thinking about. You know, we can be very, very quick sometimes to be critical of trends and what have you in the games industry, but you know, we can only look. I think it's something that affects us older people more, is because we've seen the industry grow and we've seen it different to how it is now, and we've seen where it's headed, and perhaps, you know, there's that anxiety there that this isn't a good thing. But at some point, you know, things do have to move. They have to move on. I don't agree with the direction it's going. I need to emphasize that point. But sometimes, you know, when you do wonder why do people do it, you know, it's a generational thing. I think that, you know, they're used to it and we're not, and that's what it boils down to. So anyway, thanks for watching this video. Please check out Dean's video. Hopefully I'll remember to put a link in the description box, and yeah, stay tuned to my channel for more videos to come. Thank you for watching.